While filming Jackass number 2, Johnny Knoxville attempted a motocross backflip that went horribly wrong when the bike crashed down handlebars first directly onto his crotch. Knoxville was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors discovered the trauma had torn his urethra and partially detached it from his bladder. For the next 3 years, he had to perform painful self-catheterization twice daily to keep the torn tissue from sealing shut. He later described the sensation of pushing a tube through the raw, unhealed tissue as like jamming a knife into an open wound every single day. The risk of infection was constant, and any mistake could have led to permanent urinary dysfunction or worse. In 1912, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished from his family's tent during a camping trip in Louisiana, sparking a frantic 8-month search. He was eventually found in Mississippi with another family who insisted that he was actually their son, Bruce Anderson. But sadly, the Andersons didn't have the money to fight this in court, so they lost custody of the child. The Dunbars took the boy home and raised him as their son Bobby Dunbar for the remainder of his life. Decades later, in 2004, DNA testing confirmed that the boy they took from the Andersons was not Bobby Dunbar, as the real Bobby Dunbar's fate remains unknown to this day. Morbid Facts, Part 497. In 2018, an English woman was drinking out of a glass with a metal straw when she suddenly fell with the drink in her hand. Tragically, she landed directly on the straw, which punctured her eye socket and went through her brain, killing her almost instantly. For 4 decades, Walter Freeman, the man who made lobotomies popular, had personally performed as many as 4,000 lobotomies on patients as young as 12, despite never being professionally trained to perform surgeries. At least 100 of his patients died from cerebral hemorrhaging. For many years, Beethoven kept his hearing loss a secret since he was afraid that revealing his deafness would ruin his career. He once wrote a note to his brother that he never sent, confessing that he'd been completely deaf since the age of 40 and explaining that it had an immense impact on his social life. Since many people assumed he was antisocial, Beethoven longed for human contact but became a recluse out of shame. All of this resulted in severe depression and made the composer contemplate taking his own life. Morbid Facts, Part 403. Liam Neeson's wife, actress Natasha Richardson, was taking a beginner ski lesson on a bunny hill when she suddenly fell without a helmet on. She initially refused any medical help but complained about a severe headache a few hours later. Richardson was soon flown to the hospital where she died 2 days later from a brain bleed. A park ranger on Rinka Island once sat down in his office and was attacked by a Komodo dragon hiding under his desk. Turns out the cleaner had accidentally left the door open the night before and the massive lizard snuck inside. The ranger received 30 stitches at the hospital and managed to survive, but has since quit his job and now suffers from PTSD. Harvard Law School professor Roger Fisher had an interesting idea to prevent the unjustified launch of nuclear weapons. He proposed implanting the U.S. nuclear launch codes inside a person's body next to their heart, so that the president would have to take a life in order to activate the country's nuclear weapons. In case you need a few reasons to feel thankful for your mom, these are some of the worst mothers of all time. Suffering from severe postpartum psychosis in 2001, Andrea Yates methodically drowned her 5 children one by one in the family bathtub. She believed she was saving them from eternal damnation and was committed to a mental asylum for the rest of her life. Over a 14-year span, Mary Beth Tinning's children kept dying mysteriously, 9 of them in total. The cause of death for the first few was thought to be genetic, but it was later revealed she had smothered most of them to gain sympathy and attention. In 1983, Diane Downs shot her 3 children in cold blood, killing one and paralyzing another, simply because the man she was dating didn't like kids. She then drove them to the hospital slowly while her children were screaming in agony beside her. Blanche Monier's mother imprisoned her in a windowless room for 25 years, simply because she fell in love with a man her family deemed unsuitable. Under her mother's control, Blanche was kept in darkness, starved, and left to rot in her own filth, until authorities discovered her in 1901 weighing just 55 pounds and barely clinging on to life. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman secretly gave birth to 7 infants and killed each one immediately after birth, hiding the tiny bodies in cardboard boxes in her garage. Her family discovered them years later and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Spanish woman Aurora Rodriguez conceived her daughter Hildegard as an experiment to create the perfect human. Hildegard became a prodigy, reading at age 2, speaking 4 languages by 8, and entering law school by the age of 13. But when she eventually sought independence as an adult, Aurora declared the experiment a failure and shot her daughter in her sleep. She later said the sculptor, after discovering the most minimal imperfection in his work, destroys it. She spent most of her 26-year sentence in a mental asylum. Morbid Facts, Part 604. Juana Barraza, known as the Little Old Lady Killer, was a Mexican professional wrestler who murdered at least 16 elderly women in Mexico City between 1998 and 2006. She posed as a social worker to gain access to her victims' homes, then strangled them, often with cords or her bare hands, and stole their belongings. Her strength and wrestling background, performing under the name the Lady of Silence, made her attacks especially brutal. Panic gripped the city as authorities struggled to solve the case until she was finally caught fleeing a murder scene. Barraza later confessed to deep resentment toward her abusive mother and was sentenced to 759 years in prison. Vlad the Impaler earned his name through the methodical terror he inflicted on his enemies. When the mighty Ottoman Empire invaded his territory in 1462, they were met with a nightmarish sight: a forest of 20,000 impaled corpses mounted on tall wooden stakes and left to rot beneath the scorching summer sun. The victims, captured soldiers, peasants, and anyone who defied Vlad, including children, were arranged with chilling precision, their decomposing bodies spreading a stench of death for miles. Upon seeing this grotesque display, Sultan Mehmed II was so disturbed that he ordered his army of 100,000 men to retreat. Actor Daniel Hovels accidentally slit his own throat on stage during a 2008 theatrical performance after his prop knife was somehow switched out for a real one. The audience initially thought it was all just an elaborate special effect. The blade had just barely missed Hovels' carotid artery, but he was back on stage the next day. The leading cause of death for pregnant and postpartum women in America is homicide. This is often driven by partner violence that is escalated or triggered by the pregnancy, stemming from jealousy, fear of responsibility, and financial stress. In 2014, a crematorium in Virginia caught fire during the cremation of a 500-pound body. The excessive body fat caused the furnace to overheat, igniting the building's roof. A Florida musician known as Prince Midnight constructed a fully functional electric guitar he dubbed the Skelecaster, using the skeletal remains of his deceased Uncle Philip. Philip had donated his skeleton to a medical college in Greece, but after 2 decades, the school no longer had any use for them, so the remains were returned to his family. Prince Midnight decided to honor his uncle, who introduced him to heavy metal music, by turning his ribcage, spinal column, and pelvis into a guitar. In 1987, North Korean spy Kim Hyun-hui blew up Korean Air Flight 858, killing all 115 passengers on board. After failing to take a cyanide pill afterwards, she told interrogators it was a direct order from Kim Jong-il that she had no way of backing out of without being killed. The woman was originally sentenced to death, but later pardoned by the South Korean president, who said she was merely a brainwashed victim of the real culprit, the North Korean government. Hyun-hui ended up marrying one of her interrogators, and they live happily ever after with their 2 children. While recording the audio version of his book Charlotte's Web, it took author E.B. White 17 takes to read the death scene of Charlotte. He's said to have walked outside for a breather, come back in, and started crying again every time he got to that moment. In 1184, the King of Germany was conducting a meeting with his noblemen on the 2nd floor of a church when the floor suddenly collapsed. The king, whose seat was on a separate section that didn't collapse, watched in horror as 60 of his noblemen drowned in the cesspit located below that hadn't been emptied out in years. Morbid Facts, Part 132. Angelina Jolie was once so depressed that she tried to hire a hitman to kill her. She felt that a murder would be easier on her family than if she took her own life. But the would-be hitman talked her out of it by asking her to wait a month and reconsider her decision. The skin of certain fish species can be grafted onto severe burns and diabetic wounds. The material recruits the body's own cells and is eventually converted into living tissue. According to a recent study, people in the US who were born before 1996 have a lower IQ than those born afterwards. This is due to the negative effects of leaded gasoline, which was finally banned completely on January 1st, 1996. In the late 1980s, a woman went on a vacation getaway where singles could meet other singles. She quickly thought she met the man of her dreams and decided to sleep with him that night. But when she woke up in the hotel room the next morning, the man was gone and there was a small wooden coffin on the table next to her. Inside was a note that read, "You are now HIV positive. Welcome to the world of AIDS." In one of the most horrifying cases of human captivity, Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his own daughter Elizabeth in a hidden basement beneath their Austrian home for 24 years, beginning in 1984. He repeatedly tortured and raped her, fathering 7 of her children, 3 of whom were raised in the underground dungeon without ever seeing daylight. The space was initially built as a bomb shelter and had no windows, was soundproofed, and could only be accessed through a series of hidden electronically locked doors that Fritzl installed himself. The monster kept up a front by convincing authorities and his wife that Elizabeth had joined a cult, even forging letters to support the lie. But the case was exposed in 2008 when one of the captive children fell critically ill and was brought to a hospital, prompting an investigation. Fritzl was arrested, convicted of many awful crimes, and sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility. The dungeon was later sealed with concrete, while Elizabeth and her surviving children were placed under new identities. These disturbing facts will completely shatter your perception of time. Joe Biden was born closer to Abe Lincoln's presidency than to his own. If someone born today were sworn in at age 78, the same age Biden was, they would become president in the year 2106. When the microchip was invented in 1958, Belgium was still displaying people from the Congo in human zoos. T-Rex lived closer in time to humans than to the Stegosaurus. Jack the Ripper was actively murdering people, Van Gogh painted Starry Night, the Eiffel Tower was completed, and Nintendo was founded, all in the year 1889. The 10th U.S. President, John Tyler, who was born in 1790, has grandchildren that are still alive today. The last widow of a Civil War veteran just died in 2020. 17-year-old Helen Jackson married 93-year-old James Bolin in 1936 so that she could claim his military pension after he died. And lastly, there are more slaves today than at any point in the history of the world. Macho Man Randy Savage died from a massive heart attack while driving with his wife, as an autopsy later found his coronary artery to be 90% blocked. Just a few days before he died, Randy had a routine checkup with his doctor who suggested a heart scan, which would have easily detected the fatal blockage, but Randy decided to put it off until his next visit. Known as the Meteor, this was the result of 5 floors of the World Trade Center being compressed together when the towers collapsed on 9/11. It's not known if there are human remains inside. After failing to assassinate King Louis XV in 1757, Robert Francois Damiens was sentenced to be executed by having his skin ripped open, molten lead and sulfur poured into his wounds, and dismemberment by 4 horses. Upon hearing this, Damiens replied, "Well, it's going to be a tough day." During the execution, Damiens was reportedly still alive after all of his limbs were ripped off, so his remaining torso was burned at the stake. Chandler from Mr. Beast videos suffers from a genetic eye condition called achromatopsia that only allows him to see the world in shades of white, black, and gray. It's a rare form of color blindness where all 3 cone types are completely absent from the eye, resulting in the inability to perceive any colors whatsoever. Scottish guitarist Les Harvey, known for performing with multiple rock bands throughout the 60s and 70s, narrowly escaped death in a fatal car crash in 1965, only to be fatally electrocuted on stage in 1972 after touching an ungrounded microphone. This gravestone is shared by twin sisters Emily and Minnie Dodsworth. Emily lived for just 2 days, while Minnie lived for over 100 years. In 2003, a Houston doctor stepped into an elevator when its doors malfunctioned and suddenly closed on him. The elevator then shot upward unexpectedly before the man could fully enter, instantly severing his head and shoulders while leaving the rest of his body in the hallway outside. A young nurse inside the elevator was physically unharmed but severely traumatized after she was stuck inside the elevator with the doctor's remains for several hours. Morbid Facts, Part 440. 5 days before her wedding in September of 2009, Yale medical student Annie Lee suddenly went missing in the basement of a Yale laboratory. On the actual day she was supposed to get married, her body was found hanging upside down inside a wall cavity in the building. Her murderer, a lab technician who worked in the building, was eventually caught and sentenced to 44 years in prison. After his phone was stolen in 2020, 16-year-old Kevin Bui set a Denver house on fire that he mistakenly thought was the thief's home. The blaze tragically killed 5 members of an innocent family, including 2 young kids. Bui was tried as an adult and sentenced to 60 years in prison. After suffering a stroke in 2010, UK woman Sarah Colwell started speaking with a Chinese accent despite never even visiting China. No matter how hard she tries, Sarah can't return to her normal voice. She She became one of less than 100 people to ever be diagnosed with foreign accent syndrome, a rare neurological condition caused by damage to the speech part of the brain. Morbid Facts, Part 554. Ben Wolfe, who played Infantata and Meep in American Horror Story, tragically died in 2015 at the age of 34. The 4'4" actor was crossing the street in Hollywood before he was struck in the head by a car mirror when the driver apparently didn't see him. Wolfe was rushed to the nearest hospital before succumbing to a resulting stroke. This heartbreaking video shows a zoo bear still walking in circles 7 years after being freed from the small cage she was kept in for 2 decades. In July of 2023, 57-year-old Barry Griffiths suddenly died after accidentally stabbing himself in the stomach while trying to separate 2 burger patties that were frozen. In 2002, 15-year-old Kara Robinson was kidnapped by serial killer Richard Ivanitz and subjected to 18 hours of abuse. But she managed to escape after manipulating Ivanitz to feel at ease and memorize the details of her surroundings before running off. Robinson was then able to give police a detailed description of the home, which allowed them to bring the serial killer to justice. Muppets creator Jim Henson's death was made all the more tragic by how easily it could have been prevented. In May of 1990, he dismissed what seemed like mild flu-like symptoms, unaware that his body was actually under attack by a rare strain of Group A Streptococcus. The bacteria ravaged his lungs, filling them with blood and fluid as he slipped into septic shock. By the time he stumbled into the ER, several of his organs were already shutting down, as doctors described it as being hit by a freight train of bacteria. Despite frantic attempts to save him, Henson died at age 53, 20 hours after arriving at the hospital. Medical experts later said that if he had arrived just a few hours earlier, he likely would have survived. In a chilling discovery, archaeologists have found the first physical evidence of ancient Roman gladiators battling wild animals, an 1800-year-old skeleton in York, England bearing lion bite marks on the pelvis. Excavated from Driffield Terrace, a site believed to be a gladiator cemetery, the remains belong to a man aged between 26 and 35. The bite marks on his pelvis showed no signs of healing, indicating that the injuries were most likely fatal. The gladiator was also found to have been decapitated, either as a ritual practice or mercy killing after the brutal mauling. Morbid Facts, Part 449. In 2012, Donna Summer died from lung cancer at the age of 63, even though she wasn't a smoker. The singer believed it was caused by inhaling the toxic fumes from the Twin Towers after they fell on 9/11, since the dust filled the air around Ground Zero for several months afterwards, and Summer lived nearby. In fact, around 6,400 people have since died from 9/11-related illnesses, more than double the amount that died on the actual day of the attacks. The Dani tribe in Indonesia is known to cut off parts of their fingers after the death of a loved one. In 1928, Alfred Lowenstein, the third richest man in the world at the time, completely disappeared from his private jet in the middle of a flight. After Alfred took too long to use the bathroom, his secretary went in to check on him, but the bathroom was empty and the exit door connected to it was wide open. There have been many theories put forth, but Alfred most likely opened the wrong door by accident and plunged thousands of feet to his death. Morbid Facts, Part 219. In December of 1999, a schizophrenic man broke into George Harrison's home and stabbed him over 40 times. He was only saved when his wife incapacitated the attacker by repeatedly striking him with a fire poker. Harrison's official statement following the attack was, he wasn't a burglar and he certainly wasn't auditioning for the Traveling Wilburys. When 14-year-old Shanna Holloway didn't make her high school cheer team in 1991, her mother Wanda hired a hitman to kill the mother of another girl who made the team over Shanna. Wanda thought the girl would be so devastated by her mother's death that she would end up dropping the team, therefore giving the spot to Shanna. During the American Revolution, a slave named Billy was charged with treason and sentenced to death by hanging. But he argued that as a slave he wasn't a citizen, and therefore couldn't commit treason against a government to which he owed no allegiance. The jury agreed, and with the help of Thomas Jefferson, Billy was eventually pardoned. While working on the Nevermind album, there were concerns that the naked baby on the cover might be considered too inappropriate. In response, Kurt Cobain reportedly joked that he'd slap a sticker over the baby's genitals reading, "If you're offended by this, you must be a closet pedophile." The label was uneasy, but Cobain stood firm in his refusal to change it, turning a potential PR nightmare into one of the most iconic album covers in rock history. Decades later, Spencer Eldon, the nude baby featured on the cover, sued the band in 2021 at the age of 30, claiming that the image constituted child sexual exploitation and caused him lifelong emotional distress. Ironically, Eldon had fully embraced the fame in the past, recreating the photo multiple times even nude, signing autographs, and getting a Nevermind tattoo. His lawsuit, seeking $150,000 from each defendant, was widely criticized and ultimately dismissed the next year due to the statute of limitations. Dirty facts about history that they'll never teach you in school, Part 22. During McLovin's sex scene in Superbad, actor Christopher Mintz-Plasse had to have his mother present while filming due to legal requirements. The actor was only 17 years old at the time of filming, and California law mandates that a parent or guardian must be on set when a minor is involved in scenes of sexual nature. The U.S. Navy once banned tattoos it considered obscene, leading to a boom of tattoos of nude women on men who didn't want to serve. If they decided to serve later on, they had to have a tattoo artist dress the woman to meet Navy requirements. In 1999, Disney had to recall 3.4 million copies of the children's film The Rescuers because one of the animators inserted a picture of a nude woman into 2 frames of the movie. During the Apollo missions, NASA provided male astronauts with condom-like urination devices available in small, medium, and large sizes. However, due to apparent concerns about personal image, many astronauts opted for the largest size, leading to improper fits and urine leakage. To address this, NASA engineers humorously relabeled the sizes as large, gigantic, and humongous to encourage astronauts to choose the appropriate size. Dirty facts about history that they'll never teach you in school, Part 14. In 1999, police were called to Matthew McConaughey's Texas home after his neighbor reported loud music and disturbances. When they arrived, ossifers found the actor playing the bongos while blazed out of his skull and completely naked. He was arrested for possession of marijuana. Many historians believe that the crotch part of medieval armor was enlarged not to make the knight's junk look bigger, but to prevent the pain caused by syphilis when their genitals rubbed against the metal. During the Cold War, the CIA highly considered using condoms as a weapon against Russia. They wanted to drop extra-large condoms that were labeled small on Soviet territory to lower their morale, but the plan was eventually scrapped. King Philip V of Spain and his court were known to play a game that translated to the imperturbable. A bunch of naked men would sit around a table covered by a cloth, while a lady underneath the table would put her mouth around one of their willies. The rest of the players would have to guess who was receiving it, and if their guess was correct, the player who was getting socked would have to leave the game. The game was won by the player who could climax without any of the other players noticing. Apparently, this game was very popular among French nobility in the 18th century.